Good evening and welcome to Plain Talk. In June of this year, the organization Reform, Inspire, Sustain and Educate, RISE, formed themselves into a group to pursue the issue of constitutional reform. You will recall that we've had them, the representatives from the group, on a number of occasions. This evening, again, we bring them back because we had agreed once a month on average. So we have Mr. Timothy Jonas, the attorney at law and also associated with the leadership of the organization, Mr. Elson Lowe, another prominent member, and Elson, you've been here before.
Indeed.
And we have our country's leading columnist, Dr. Henry Jeffery, who will add some spice to our discussions this evening. As you can see, the program, we gave it a subtitle, Are We Ready? And maybe I shall pose that question immediately to the representatives from RISE, whether you think, from the experiences you've had to date, all the outreaches you've had, whether the message you're getting is that Guyana is ready for constitutional reform.
That is such a short question and capable of such a wide range of answers. I wonder where to start. If you try to address the question from the problems which Guyana has encountered in terms of trying to understand the ramifications of our Constitution, trying to apply them fairly, and trying to achieve just results through the Constitution, we have faced such a myriad of problems that we are certainly ripe for some kind of reform. So from the point of view of problems, we need some changes. Of course, changes can only be implemented in the context of the Constitution, by those who are sitting in Parliament, therefore by the two parties that have run Guyana for the past 50 years. So if you ask the question, are we ready for constitutional reform from the point of view of those parties who hold power, I wonder if they meaningfully want to contribute to a reform of the process. As we know, they have taken steps recently. There has been a committee identified, there has been a bill proposed, all toward constitutional reform, which was one of the watchwords in the elections 2 years ago. We all take hope from that development, and we want to see where it goes. So, in the context of the need, there's a need. We are right for reform. In the context of the will, that remains to be seen.
Can I ask you a follow-up question, and the gentleman will comment? Mr. Nigel Hughes at the Business Summit recently said we have the most progressive constitution in the Caribbean. Do you subscribe to that against your suggestion that we have had myriad of problems?
A word like progressive is so subjective that it becomes incapable of definition. It's almost as bad as the expression fit and proper.
Progress can also be good and bad, you know. Just to throw that out there.
This is true. And when you talk about a progressive constitution, what are you talking about? For me, a constitution can only best reflect the will of the people if an attempt is made to have it in simple language so that the people understand it. Mm-hmm. In that context, our constitution, I don't think is progressive. I think it's much too complicated, it's much too cumbersome, there's too much verbiage. In terms of the underlying concepts in the structure, so the rights which are guaranteed, freedom of assembly, right to privacy, protection of your liberty, those concepts have existed for hundreds of years, and they are enshrined in our Constitution, and in that regard, our Constitution is progressive. I think that we need simplicity, but I don't think that in terms of those underlying concepts, our Constitution lacks force.
Elson, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could start real quick with the question of whether or not we're ready. Having spoke to, I want to say about 100 leaders of youth groups across this country in the last 2 months.
This is part of
This is
Rise's
part of-
outreach.
This is part of our outreach, and we can leap into that in a second, the debate competition. You know, especially, you know, in the regions outside of Region 4, Region 3, you know, young people are interested but not as au fait. And so I would say that a lot of work needs to be done to educate people, but you're never really going to be ready for something like constitutional reform. You just have to get it done. And you can't leave it lagging forever because you're going to be dealing with the consequences of leaving that. And so that's in part what Rise is really trying to push, is to educate and kind of get young people and get Guyanese more broadly involved and to the point where they can have a specific opinion.
Dr. Jeffery?
Well, let me start from the notion of Ghana having one of the most progressive constitutions, because the PB say this all the time. But a constitution must be fit for the country and make a country operate at a given level of justice and fairness and quietness, if you want the right word. And this constitution doesn't do that. This constitution just throws into turmoil with all this. Who shall be the chairman of the election commission? This constitution has also, I have about 29 things that this constitution should be changed. Why should we have one justice determining constitutional issues? I mean, I got plenty. So a constitution is as good as how it makes the country operate. This constitution has not made us operate in a proper fashion, therefore it is not good. People says that all the time. We need a constitution that would bring together our people, because we are an ethnic kind of a society, that would bring together people, sit them down and says work together. That has happened elsewhere, it can happen here. This constitution is one of the British force past the post nonsense that has no place. We have changed this constitution in 2001, but we left in place since then. I wrote on that when I was still minister, that we left in place a winner-take-all situation. We left in place a majoritarian sort of, in every committee, for the most part, the government controls it. The government of the day controls every single committee, maybe excepting the public accounts committee. But that was in there in colonial time. So effectively, no, we don't have the most progressive constitution, largely because it doesn't fit our purpose. Constitutions are not just in the Caribbean. We are not a Caribbean country in terms of the structure of our population and all that. So that's out of it. That's nonsense. Are we ready for it? That is the difficult question, you know. Because you have to look at this issue from a couple standpoints. I think we're ready, but everybody sitting at this table are elites of one form or another. And therefore we might think we are ready, but can I say comrade?
As the young man said.
Oh, you see, you want to move away from comrade. Young man.
Yeah.
That's your style. Essentially, but but as he says just now, and rightly so, that you got to move to the people, but then the people may not understand all this confusion you're talking about constitution. Just look at how I was trying to explain what's happening just a few seconds ago. The people might not really understand all of that. So who decides when we're ready? I'm not elitist in any way. Who decides when we are ready? Because we want a constitution that will make us live in peace. Get rid of all this confusion that we're seeing here at this point of time. Can the people actually determine that? What the people know for fact, and I was talking at a meeting 2 days ago, is that what we have ain't working. Whether or not that needs to be solved by constitutional reform is another story. And what type of constitutional reform you're talking about? You can have minimalist constitutional reform, you can have maximalist. But I would call maximalist in the sense that I am saying that constitutional reform should really be talking about how we share governance in Guyana. But there's another level of constitutional reform that can say, for example, we must have post-election coalition. Like we should have more than one judge, looking at constitutional issues. That we must have more constituents. That's a different level of constitutional reform. So these are troublesome issues, and they are not made simple by by a task that's saying, are we ready? I think we're ready, and the fact.
Are we ready, or is it that we need them?
No. Well, we would. I put readiness in terms of need.
Because just now you were saying how complex these issues are.
Right, but we are ready, because if we are not ready to do this, we're going to continue as we are. It's a need. It is a need that we move forward, at least in my view. And so I believe we are ready.
I want to take that even further. It kind of reminds me of, at the end of the Mexican-American War, the reason they didn't incorporate Mexico is because, the Mexicans aren't ready, South American people can't handle democracy. This is a rights issue as well, and rights issues, whether or not, we can easily get it done, we have to always try to push to have the most representative government that is possible.
So, Tim, if we're ready, and I think there's some agreement that either we need it or we're ready. Where is the delay, and who is the we that might not be ready? Is it we talk about these giants, the two parties, the two behemoths? Are they ready? Are they willing for constitutional reform?
Okay. You ask where is the delay, and I think what we just saw here is one of the reasons for the delay. We get so sidetracked with conversations which are red herrings. Henry just raised the question of elites as opposed to reaching out to a grassroots level. That's a red herring. That's a conversation that raises an emotional response. Whereas you have four people who are sitting here trying to discuss not who should be involved in the constitutional reform, but what our opinion is to reach out for constitutional reform, what the end result of constitutional reform should be. So if we can focus on that, what is the end result, then those questions become meaningful, which you just asked, which is what's causing the delay. You identified the two parties, you called them monoliths. I think that we can safely agree that those two parties and their members have been the sole beneficiaries of power in Guyana throughout. It therefore is not in their interest to permit any change in the status quo, unless there is a genuine, bona fide, good faith attempt from people within the parties who have both the charisma to get it done and the integrity to want to do it, to make the change, so that indeed we have a leadership that is reflective of the population and the will of the population. At the end of the day, it will not be done without the concurrence of the two parties, because those two parties hold the executive and they hold the parliament. And the people have no traction, because at the end of the day, the people have not for 50 years voted on any single relevant policy that should be foremost in your mind at election time. If I ask for an economic policy, most people will not be able to identify an economic policy which they have supported. If I ask for a social policy, most people will not be able to identify a social policy. But that is what, in a civilized country, you should be voting on. And until that becomes foremost, you have a delay. Because that issue, then, those real substantial issues become secondary to the ugliness which we currently face in our political spectrum.
Given what Tim and Jeffrey have just said, is that it's really trying to convince these two giants, and they're the ones who, in the final analysis, will have to take it up. The work that RISE is doing, admirable as it is, how does it get past that? We can't say it's insurmountable, because then we wouldn't be talking about getting past.
Yeah.
How do you do it?
I mean, so RISE's emphasis on education is, I think, important, because we want people to have a good understanding of why we have the issues that we have currently in our society, why things are failing. And as a result of that, we want them to start agitating to see things move in a positive direction. I think the other thing is, it doesn't have to be a old system, new system, us versus them kind of a narrative, because I think at the end of the day that this is in everyone's interest. And, you know, as a young person who is probably going to be fighting away in Guyana for another 60 years, I mean, I don't want to be living with this constitution for the whole time, because it will wear me down, you know, every time you're out of office, oh God, you know, another 5 years. And then, I mean, it's such that the people who lose don't have a vested interest in continuing to fight on, right? And so that creates all the different disincentives. So what we're trying to do is to educate as much as possible so that young people can start agitating for, and so that we as a broader citizenry can start agitating for something that is more sustainable and that will yield the type of long-term benefits to both parties.
Well, let me just take out on this, because every political institution in this country has started off by saying that they have to go to the people to ask them what they want. This thing can be done. Some as a means of delay, but in Trinidad, I went out to all over the world meeting Trinidadians, all over. But in real terms, they have all said this. And it means quite clearly they want buy-in from the people. It's not just the four of us here, by any stretch. They want the people to buy in. And therefore, again I go back to this, because you're making some smart. You have not to say that we can sit down and do what we want to do, but to say that we have to also explain the complications of the system, so that people will know that this, if you're not quite clear, is nothing wrong. No, I don't think any one of us here can claim to be quite clear about what it is that. And the result is that yes, I think that we need the people's input, but I think as what you'll call elites, you are the drivers of that input. I mean, I know elitism is a bad word, but
it's an elitist word.
It's an elitist. Indeed, it's an elitist world. You show me outside of Guyana where Critchlow perhaps did some little revolution. Who has led revolutions in the world?
Yeah.
From Lenin to all of them, to Karl Marx, Castro, they're all elites. It's a notion, it's a popular notion, elites, but yeah, they want to drive. Look, all these people are running these parties up and down the thing. As I said today, their membership is stable. But we have to understand quite clearly that the people must be involved in this, but we need to go out there as educators and as thing and speak, and we can learn too, because sometimes you sit down there and some people say some funny, and you say, shucks, how did I miss this? But at the end of the day, you did most of the reading. These people got to make a living every day, so it's important. I think it's important to go to the people, to speak to them, but at the same time to have in mind the entire global directions of what's going on. By global, I mean universal direction, or where how countries like us can find a sensible system and live with each other. And it's, at the end of the day, it's the elite, the oligarchs, call them what you like. Is they going to press this forward? And the fact that the point you were making there, that the oligarchs on both sides only seem to want the system when they are not in power, to want change when they are not in power. Is that a myopia in their part, or is it just the power grab? I am not certain. And that's, you know, look at this law. Part of my quarrel with this regime is essentially...
You refer to them as a regime, no?
Yeah, but I've done so other things. I sort of equate government and regime.
Okay.
So, yeah. But my quarrel with this regime is that they promised, PPP never promised this. Indeed, they promised, they said, we understand that we need to change constitution to share the government, and they have done no such thing. The PPP never. They had the opportunity in 2011. They just did not do it. I mean, they could have taken it. But they just went there. But this regime put it in their manifesto. They went. They said, we understand the need for this. And then we are now told that being with the AFC and the APNO, that is what it meant. When they had poor David Hines writing up all sorts of things.
Well, they now have an opportunity to push that, don't they? They now have an opportunity to push for reform.
Now, is it that, given that the Constitution, it's easy to say we want a simple Constitution, but the Constitution has to set out a vision for the people. The basis, how you get there, it has to deal with issues like guarantees of rights. It has to deal with separation of powers. It's
how many pages are the American Constitution?
The,
17, 18, 20? What?
I don't
How many pages are?
That's the point. You've identified items in the Constitution as if they are large.
Yes.
But the Declaration of Rights, the rights which are enshrined in the Constitution, there's a couple clauses. 7, 8 clauses.
No, if you say that, as a matter of fact, we only have one fundamental right clause, Article 40. But we don't want to get it. And we have a whole set from 138 to 152. You have protection of fundamental rights. No, the question I was getting at, though, then, was not to suggest one or that, is to say, is it because, and I'm not trying to make an excuse for the political party, is it that when you get in there and you look at it, constitutional reform is in fact a very complex thing, and when particularly, and I know Chief Justice Chang had spoken on this matter, can you really do what you want to do without upending the entire constitution?
Yes.
All right.
Yes, because it must be based on natural, what we call natural law, as almost. Let me show you. Let me tell you something about this. Let me go back to this entire process here. About
Starting when?
No, the whole idea of choosing a chairman, right? When you go,
You mean to go there?
no, I don't mean to go there. I mean, I can go other places, but I go there because it's topical. But it's like a race. This is not that no party should have an advantage. The natural law will tell you that everybody got to face the tape unless you got some, I don't know, handicap race, and then, but that is defined. So everybody must face the gun and then brace the tape. You can't give anybody an advantage. You can't say anybody any one of the parties, if it's 100 of them, must have any sort of chance to determine what's going to happen by the rules of the race. That's just, it seems to me like so if you have a formula that says, that's confusing, let me say the Carter formula is confusing. You have to say, but this is not a big deal. You're not you're supposed to write that down. This is not right. It's not. In an election process, every single party that go there should have the same rights of setting up the rules and do everything. You don't need no charter formula. It should just tell you that you're starting at the God. Now.
But you
don't. So you don't have to write down that whole
No,
process of whether or not who should choose. Then there's about 20 pages.
Henry, I don't want to put you on the line.
Yeah,
but whilst you were a member of Parliament, you incorporated
Yes.
that Carter formula into the Constitution.
Yeah, but I'm not quarreling with the Carter formula. I am saying when you interpret it, you must interpret it in the way that I've just said.
Oh, I see. Just interpretation.
I'm not quarreling. I am not claiming that is wrong, because I don't think there's anything wrong about it.
Okay.
I think that if you say, all right, we got a problem in this thing, it's an election, everybody should have a right, this equal rights to do this. Can't give no one man an advantage.
So back to this question. Is it that political parties suddenly realize, look, this is a big task to try to rewrite the Constitution?
Again, that is an excuse.
That's an excuse.
So
like,
how do you do it?
like you setting up an excuse now.
I ask innocent questions. You see, Tim is answering them with very straight face. Go.
A small group of people have got together and they've said, we've waited 2 years for you to start this enormously complicated and hugely expensive process of constitutional reform, which will need its own budget, its own parliamentary approval, all kinds of trips to the interior and this and that in committees.
Consultation,
A
partner.
small group of people has said, we will give it our shot. We will try. We are going to reach out. We are going to ask Chris Ram for permission to go on his show so that we can talk to members of the public. We are going to have meetings at institutions like the University of Guyana, which may fall into Henry's category, but also at high schools throughout the country, also at other fora, so that we can talk to people. We intend to hold debates. We intend to go on social media and ask for feedback, so that we reach out, because Henry is absolutely right. Your man on the road may not be able to tell you the little nitty-gritty of the articles and subclauses and subparagraphs which are the end result, but he knows right and he knows wrong. And when he's faced with a problem, as we have been faced with so many problems over the years, he knows right and wrong. It becomes easy to overlook right and wrong and to shrug and say, I don't have time with that, because of the affinity that an individual may feel. But that man on the road knows right and wrong. And if we come up with an end result that we can present, it gives the light to all the conversation about how complicated the thing is, how expensive the thing is, how many committees need to be formed. It gives the light to that. But hopefully, it also satisfies that man on the road that we have consulted, we have done what should be done, and this end result is right. That this feels right. This looks like it works. That is what we want to do.
That's what we want to do. Is it that's what you are in fact doing then, to come out with a product?
You're trying.
Well, we're on the Chris Ram show right now. So we're
No,
doing the best that we can.
this is talking about I'm talking about the product itself. Is it that Rise intends to come up with a modular constitution or a model constitution and said, okay, this is what we believe.
That is what we hope to do. We hope to have an end result where we can make recommendations that, and I disagree with Henry on this, that aren't revolutionary in terms of altering everything and introducing an entirely new product, but that identifies the problems which exist and makes suggestions so that an end result is there. A draft constitution is there which shows why we have changed what we changed and why we have introduced what we want to introduce.
Let me ask you a
I
specific
agree
question.
with you there. I didn't think that's what I said, but I agree with you there.
Let me ask you this. So you would retain the superstructure of the 1980 Constitution?
It doesn't matter.
No. I'm asking a straight question.
No, you're not, because that question tries to imply that there's some kind of tarnish to the 1980 Constitution.
No. Why say that?
So
Why?
you have a constitution, you have something that is on the ground that exists.
Yes.
Mhm.
You don't throw it away and start from scratch, because you then, by doing that, you reinvent and recreate all the old problems. You have to learn from what you have. So you start with what you have, you identify the problems that exist, and you fix them.
Yeah.
So it's an evolutionary process. That's why the American Constitution has amendments. Because as you grow, as you evolve, you nudge and you change and you shift and you adjust in the hope of getting a nice end result. And that's what we have to do.
And in the preamble, I think, of our Constitution, you're the law, I can't even remember.
There is a law.
But I can remember reading clearly that we recognize that changes will need to be made.
Yes,
well,
yes, yes.
It's not
Yeah,
the
yeah,
first
yeah.
chapter, something like that.
Yeah.
And therefore we set up a constitutional
That's the preamble,
reform
yeah, that's the
commission.
yeah.
It's the preamble.
Yeah, yeah.
You're the lawyer, I don't know. But suddenly we need constitutional reform, and we're not using that. We gone for something in Parliament because people want humbug. It's humbug. They have it. We recognize that you need to reform and change this thing as we go along. Why not use the mechanism?
I think we also have to recognize that our function, if we're undertaking a responsibility that is as serious as this, is to be honest and direct with the people that we are reaching out to. To me, a lot of the clauses in this sound nice, and yet they're meaningless. So that if you try to sell it, if you try to market a clause, we have a clause in here that says land to the tiller.
It's not justiciable.
If you say that to the man on the street, if you go to the farmer and you say the Constitution says land to the tiller, he will nod solemnly and say that sounds good. But that is a meaningless, useless clause because it imposes no obligation on anyone and it creates no right vested in anyone else. It needs to come out. So what that does is that detracts, that distracts attention from the real substance of the Constitution and from what we should be concentrating on. We have to take out that kind of
Well, you realize that that particular, you mentioned that article. That article was in fact amended by the committee, the Constitutional Reform Commission. It was amended as Article 1 was amended, taking about those words on in transition to socialism. So, but strictly, it didn't go to referendum, therefore it has remained in place. So, should the starting point then be to use the work that was produced by that commission, including, and you're right, Tim, that's one of the clauses, articles that were touched. Should that be the starting point? Would that make it easier?
What do you mean? I mean, the present Constitution cannot be totally discarded.
No, but
Right? And therefore it's the starting point for you to go and determine what you want to change, what you don't want to change. When we had a 1966,
we had the Independence Constitution.
Right.
We had an Independence
It's
Constitution.
lots of what there is in this one.
I don't think that's what Chris is getting at, though.
No, that's not what I'm getting
What
at.
you
That's
getting
correct.
at then? What
No,
you
I'm
getting
saying-
at?
So there's been recommendations in the past.
They were that were actually accepted by the Parliament, but then they had to take it because they touched. Some of them could have been accepted. Some of them needed to go to referendum. So there has been a lot of work on constitutional reform that hasn't been taken to the ultimate. Of course, the Parliament's life having come to an end, you got to start back from scratch, but at least you got the material, you can pick it up. So my question is, do you start from there or you go right back to where we are now with with the Constitution as we have with the 2002 amendments?
You never reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
So we have a situation, we know that there was a lot of discussion. There were two large efforts. One was done in 01 and one was done with the Hughes Commission that Nigel Hughes was part of recently. And both of them made recommendations, accomplished some work, and we have taken them on board. So part of what we are doing is to look at the recommendations which were made by those two committees and decide if we agree or not, throw it out to the people to see what the general consensus is, and incorporate that into what we're doing. That is not a difficult question. That is something that's obvious. If someone makes a suggestion and if someone has taken that effort to intelligently peruse what is there and make recommendations, you must look at it.
You see, I raised that question because lots of the discussions that have been taking place have ignored that particular incident, work that has been done. So that when we still talk about land to the tiller, but in fact, the words have been changed, shall be for productive use. Those are the words that have
And
been
is that
accepted.
more meaningful?
I don't know.
Yeah, you must know.
But Chris, you're not pushing us into getting into the details of this, rather it is the macro product. For instance, all the experiences we have at this point of time will have to be taken into consideration when we're moving forward. Land to the tiller, all the other situations.
Transition to socialism.
Right, all
That's
of
a
this
classic.
will
Or the
constitute-
cooperative republic
Yeah.
of Ghana.
Yeah.
That has also been
That's true.
changed.
Yeah, but all of these
Subject
things,
to referendum.
yeah, but all of these, I'm not certain, maybe we should go back. We need to cooperate and do have a cooperative republic, but not necessarily in cooperating society. But that's beside the point. We can argue that. But the essence is that all of our experiences and all of the outcomes that we have had so far will be located in any new discussion that we will take place. It's no use we looking for anyone and pull them out. We are going to have to look at all of them and say, well, this is now what we have agreed upon. And maybe other things that we never even conceived of at that time that will have to be put in the old game. We can't bother with it, many ties, so to speak.
I think that the timing is right. And your first question was, why are we ready? Perhaps the better question would be, is the timing right? Because for some reason we are at a stage in our political development where we are seeing where the problems lie in the existing structure. And we have possibly grown, possibly evolved as a society, where we can have a rational discussion about it. And there are enough elements in the society to genuinely want to achieve a result that helps Guyana, rather than one which is politically self-motivated, self-serving.
Also, you could say that we need to push for it before we start pumping oil, because apparently people go crazy as soon as oil starts pumping, and as our next door neighbors can show us.
380 million US, that is what, that 10% of our budget. Chris, you just do all this. I mean, for the
In the
3
first year,
years,
in the first year,
couple of years.
no, if rice and sugar and gold and bauxite and diamond produce the same amount, and PAY and VAT, it will still account for 28%.
Yeah, well,
So it's significant.
Yeah, it's-
All will be significant from year one. From year one.
Well, I know
From
this
year
is
one.
380.
Also,
Yeah,
remember, you have your future
I'm talking about the
projected, you know.
GDP and in terms of, but yes, I mean, but for me, the only reason, I think I told you, the day we have constitutional reform, whether or not it's right or wrong, the next time we have it, the last time we had it was wrong because it was set in a majoritarian framework. Because Haidt didn't understand him. I don't think he did. Later he understood, by which time that is gone. And I don't even care if it's there. That's when I would say, well, let me go and forget it and let Timothy and continue it. But let me tell you something.
The younger
that
ones.
It is important, essentially important. It does not that we try to make a framework for this country that will put all the ethnic groups at ease working with each other. I'm not talking about reconciliation and loving. I'm talking about coexistence and knowing that we all live and work together with each other. And that, for me, is the central process of all of this in Utah.
I would say you could even argue that having the opposite work well would be just as good, right? Even if people fight and disagree,
Yeah.
forcing them to compromise,
Yeah,
that's the key,
coexistence,
you know?
Well, on this issue, and Lincoln Lewis has been both articulate and loud, that look, what we need at this stage is not constitutional reform, but to get what is there working. What's wrong with that position? Because he's saying, look, local government, we've never allowed it to work. Regional government, we do not have.
I don't
We do
think
not
I
have-
think he shift.
No, hold on. We don't. No, he said it yesterday evening again.
Yeah.
He said it. We do not have a regions act. So even the regions don't know what the power really is. It's dependent on what a minister tells them. So, in terms of how you and Ravi Dev was very big into this issue, the federal system, so that you allow regions to raise their own money,
Yeah.
and in
Have their own budgets.
Australia, Canada,
Yeah.
India, lots of places do this. Is it that we need to get the existing constitutional arrangement that we have in place moving? We don't have a human rights commission, so all your human rights, all those protections, mean nothing because you don't have a human right body to complain to. Should our first task, or a concurrent task, be to get your constitution going?
Chris, if you got some laws, people supposed to follow the laws and deal with the laws. I mean, there's not an issue. Whether or not you should not make what you have work.
It is an
That's
issue.
not it. Yeah, but that's not the issue. You can't have laws and break the laws. So, I mean, that's not a statement. It's a thing you must do. But the laws are sometimes insufficient. Well, a simple one that we just mentioned. Should we have a court in which one person making constitutional decision? Are we not to change that in the Constitution?
Hold on, that's not in the constitution.
No.
This is the third time you said
but
no. Tim, the constitutional court came from practice direction.
Not correct. It's not a constitutional.
It's not a constitutional requirement, sir.
Yeah, all right.
But that doesn't mean it should not be.
Yeah, it can be, yes, it can be,
should
yes.
Part.
But at the moment
Shouldn't
it's...
we
Yeah,
have
that's
a clearer notion of separation of powers? Should we really allow the party that control the executive to control the parliament?
Yeah.
I mean, what are you talking about? Those things need to be changed. Mr. Lewis recognizes that too, and he says, well, that is true. But, you also have, if you run the laws say you have this thing we call the Constitutional Reform Commission. And if you did it properly, you could pass those strings through the Constitutional Reform Commission and change them. I have no quarrel with that second argument. But no, the Constitutional Reform Commission never seemed to work. And
You're talking about standing committee.
yes,
Article 119, yes,
right.
yes.
So he's saying no. There might be quite a few things but they need to go to this standing. But that don't mean you don't need constitutional
Yes.
reform.
Well, my question is
Right,
whether you should
what
do
you are
them
saying-
concurrently.
No. Yeah, everything you do in this world, perhaps you should do concurrently if possible. Why you'll stop one to do the other one? I mean, unless you're going to cause tremendous disaster.
You talk about the regions and you talk about creating the constituencies, but you mention it as a broad concept. Do you have a suggestion as to how that will be implemented, so that how a constituency or how a region will be identified? What will qualify a geographical area to be a constituency or a region?
Well, prior to proportional representation, we had we moved from, I think it was 53 at 153 constituencies, something like that. And then we moved to a single constituency. Then we moved back and we said, no, that's ain't working too good, because you don't have representation. Parliament is too far away from the people. Then we moved to have a 40 at the national level and 25 at the constituency level. The constituency coincides exactly with the regions. So the 10 regions have 25 parliamentary representatives. The trouble is we don't know who they are.
And
Yeah, it's not working at all.
none of this stemmed from a genuine attempt to have representatives appearing and saying, I act for this geographical area. All of that was created by the two parties who saw a way to perpetuate their control of the entire system.
But they had
So that goes back to my question. Sorry, Evan.
Hang on.
But that goes back to my question. Can any of us here suggest a methodology to identify how to identify geographical areas in Guyana that fairly show reflect a constituency?
You're putting that question to me?
Yes.
I'm going to answer it after Henry has spoken.
Let me speak, because you just answered it. There were geographical constituencies, not a great big thing. to go and determine
Population
you know,
and so on.
what geography and how much of population, but they even that got its problems too, you know, because here
Because gerrymandering.
gerrymandering, Chenny Jagan and Borbis.
Your favorite word, your favorite word.
Chenny
Yeah,
Jagan
English
and
favorite word.
Borbis with one set of people end up with 7 seat
So
board
let me ask the question again.
Yes.
in Georgia,
Okay.
end up with 30
Well,
with less.
yeah.
So, but all of that can be worked out. It's been worked
I
out
disagree.
everywhere. It
I
can be
disagree.
worked.
Yeah, well,
You don't think that can be worked
When
out?
you
Of
have
course.
when you have two parties seeking to
Oh,
perpetuate
but
their
you
system, how do you work it out? That's why I'm asking you. How do you propose?
Because you got single transferable vote system. But when you call it single, that seems not the right word.
We don't have single transfer.
No, we
Here.
don't have that, but that's what you should have. So essentially, we are saying, you must ask yourself first what you need in terms of the constituency. You want the people to be responsible to constituency. That's the essence of wanting
Yeah.
it, not really.
Yes.
No, so you can have a constituent there, and if you win, let's say by 1 vote more, your 1 vote more would go to your party nationally. And if you win by 100 votes more, your 100 votes going to your party nationally. So at the end of the day, the numbers of parliamentary seats would be equal to the amount of votes you
proportionate
get in
votes.
the
That's
country,
correct.
but you still got constituencies.
Yes, yeah.
represented. So this is possible. And I mean, it happened elsewhere. This is not.
Tim, you want me to answer that question?
Yes, please.
My view, and I've said this on a number of occasions, 11B, Section 11B, I think I discussed this with you. Section 11B of the Representation of the People's Act is unconstitutional. It violates your democratic process. I think we can successfully challenge a situation whereby you can have independent candidates going and standing for one of those 25 and say, I want to be a parliamentary representative for Region 4. I see it as entirely possible, and I see it as desirable, and I think it will go a long way. It will go a long way because this one seat, autocratic majority, we have one way or the other, will be addressed.
Well, all of those things can be addressed in the constitutional
Yeah.
reform.
No, but I'm saying you don't even need
but
constitutional
you want
reform
the
to do
court,
it.
since you become a lawyer, believe everybody must go to court. If you got the mechanism that you are setting up to do things, let's do it in a holistic way.
No, but
you are not
so
trying to say we can go to court now and still be able to be do
so
that
what?
as a representative.
If we don't get parliament, if we don't get constitutional reform, we don't do anything about
No.
it. No, but
If we
Henry,
don't,
Tim
yes.
asked me a question and I gave him my answer.
Yes.
I think that's the way to do it.
And I
That's
think
that's the way we can do it.
in
one
the
thing
context
that has
that we
come up-
are.
that there is consensus here, and I really believe there is consensus through the whole country. The present status quo is undesirable.
That's correct.
No one in Guyana is happy,
Right.
and that is a problem that makes the time ripe for constitutional reform. So going back to your first question, is the time ripe? No one in Guyana is happy. Everyone in Guyana is looking at their own party and seeing their own party as marginally better than the other party, and trying hard to justify why one is not exactly the same as the other. No one is happy. And for that reason, the time is right for constitutional reform in Guyana. The only question is, do we get it achieved with these parties that
And
no
what
one is
is it?
happy with?
And what is it that we're going to reform? Because we did have constitutional reform, big thing. 2 years they run around.
That's correct. We had experts come from all
over the
Yeah.
place.
world.
So we got to also think about the content, but there's no doubt about the need.
Yeah, but I think everybody has spoken this evening. Is there the political will at the level of the two major political groups?
We will
No.
see. The bill has been introduced. The committees have been talked about. We will see.
But
No,
Tim,
absolutely.
again, I
There's no
followed.
way.
I actually did a paper for the last Constitutional Reform Commission. I appeared before it, etc. And all these studies, all these recommendations come. The PNC, they dealt with this whole question of 2-term and 1-term and all those things. You should, and I keep saying, there are 2 things I would recommend people read, both by Haslin Paris. the report on the constitutional reform work is a very voluminous thing, and the constitution, what it will look like, which is why I suggested that there are some changes that had been made but weren't effected because of the
was
procedural
suggested,
thing.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, but I don't know those changes will make any, even if you incorporate those, I don't think they make any difference to our living.
Yeah, one thing I think
You
is
know, because essentially they are framed in a majoritarian framework. They would make no difference.
But when I ask if we then should we, when I asked about the 1980 constitution, people are saying, am I trying to suggest that there's something wrong with it? But I think that's what Tim
Nobody
said.
said.
But, Tim did. Tim did, yes.
I didn't
he
know
did.
that.
Because
All I said, everything must be put in the discussion, and all of it we'll have to look at. But I think you can include all that you have, all your recommendations, but because they're in a majoritarian framework, they will not work.
yeah, and you gotta kind of ask the question. I mean, I don't know if people really realize this, but there's been 2 turnovers of government in the whole history of this country.
Yeah,
Maybe-
it's a different story.
I mean, but it does imply that the institutional controls
I'm
are
not sure
problematic.
I'm
in
not
this
sure
country.
you're right.
Isn't
I
it
mean,
3
yeah,
turnovers?
they're two major groups.
Yeah.
But you've had in '64. You had then you had in '92, then you had in 20. So
Yeah,
you've
but
had
that's
more.
what I'm saying. This is 50 something years and
Yeah.
only 3 times.
Yeah.
When you get in
but
power for
it's
20 to 30
ethnic
years, you're in
voting.
power.
It's ethnic
Because it's
voting.
ethnic voting, and your two major
Yeah.
groups represent ethnic.
And that
minorities.
has been legacy
this
for a
is the
long time.
That's the problem.
And no matter what you
How
do
constitutional
with
reform
all your recommendations and put them there, that determines the outcome.
But
and that is the problem.
I think one of the key
You-
things that
So-
happened in the last election, though, is that you kind of got the impression that there were ways around the ethnic tension that we had for a long time.
Yes,
You know, and there are additional strategies. I keep saying it
Things
seems
have
to be
changed,
that the
right?
only the British can figure out how to move things around. Once we inherit the country, can't figure out how to move past the framework that they left us in.
Did 2015? We don't, I know this is not the purpose of the program we're talking about. Did 2015
This
really?
program got work.
Hold on.
You didn't tell us.
Trust me, we did say what not only one of the columnists, but one of the cynics. No, if 2015 had in fact solved our problem, how come we're where we are
It
in
does not
2017?
solve-
No, that's what the gentleman said.
don't think
You
so. He didn't
mean it
suggest
like overall solve. It
Yeah.
helped. It got rid of
But-
the PPP. That was a help. But it does not solve
But
because
replacing one with another, does that help?
No,
The-
yes, because they won't be there long. At least there is something of a movement.
The idea of
So-
competitive governance,
Yes,
though, is much stronger.
But I mean, you got rid of the PPP, and that's good. They've been there 20-something years.
Growing up,
It's a
the
movement.
psychology was
But it
you could never
cannot
get an
solve
office
the
ever.
problem because you still have. All right, so now you got like a little people with black ethnicity controlling the show, and you got a whole lot of Indian people out there alienated. So we have solved the issue, but I mean, we you ameliorate it in the sense of you get rid of a 23-year government.
How do you see a more long-term solution by constitutional reform?
Who are you asking that question? You're throwing it to
Everybody,
general?
anybody,
Yeah.
anybody and everybody.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, so I mean, Rice is obviously advocated for many things. But one of the key things and the key questions I think we gotta ask is whether we want to continue with the proportional representation system, and whether that will, if we shift from that to more of a constituency-based system, that will create the right incentives to have a one or more representative and 2 more effective governance system. And if that can end up being the major change in the constitutional reform process, then I think that will go a long way towards where we need to go.
Out with the old and in with the new.
Sounds like a lovely
For
slogan.
the first time in Guyana over the last 10 years, we have had the beauty in our political system that a third party held the swing. So that the ethnic voting that Henry talks about and that we all know is our ugly reality is no longer so pervasive that it grips all of us. We now have a large enough majority that is willing to step away from the party of affinity and say we recognize that this is destructive, we will go a middle road. So I believe that it may not be necessary to try to revamp the system, because our need has changed, our need has evolved. Our need is no longer based on polarized society, although we are becoming more polarized, unfortunately. Our need now is to recognize that there is a moderate middle, and that moderate middle is growing and can possibly, within the existing structure, have a say.
Henry?
There is no doubt that the last election demonstrated that we are both in that, not race, we talk about race, but it's ethnicity, right? And that there is a shifting group in ethnicity that's not hardwired to either the PPP or PNC. They will prefer the PNC, but if the PNC operate and give away, they're not hardwired to it. They are willing to make movements one way or another. No, and similar for the PPP, that everybody's not hardwired to it. But that 4,000 votes that they won by whatsoever demonstrates to me that will be a long movement. It takes us 60 years to get here. Therefore, my proposal would be for some kind of arrangement that maybe we discuss shared governance at this stage. To bring all the parties, because even if you get another, suppose the PPP got 4,000 votes and they won, all the blacks live out there again and feel alienated. And then, but you are just like happened now, because remember, the black leadership ain't going away, and they're going to stir up and stir up. That's what ethnic entrepreneurs do. So, and you're not going to get rid of them, and it's no use to fool yourself. So, just like Indians, a whole bunch of people now feel alienated from this government, the same thing going to happen up the road, and they're going to be alienated. So my story is, yes, but as people learn to work together, that group that Timothy spoke about will get bigger. And therefore, we should set up a framework, some mechanism to give them the opportunity to work together as of now. And then later, it's going to get bigger, and then we just drop all of that, and we go along.
We got 1 minute, and I'll rise.
The framework for that is free enterprise. Because the fact of the matter is that when you have a good
is that a
customer,
code name for capitalism?
yes. When you have a customer who you trust, who you know will come to pay you, who you will give credit to, it does not matter if he's black or Indian. And when you go to those small businesses, those small furniture makers, the welders, the men, the entrepreneurs, they don't care what color you are if they trust you and if they are willing to transact business with you.
Well, I don't
That
know
is
if
the
the argument that capitalism leads to democracy always follows a la China. But anyway, just to close off, I
Quickly,
also
yes.
really quickly wanted to say, so we have our debate competition starting this weekend. Teams from across Guyana. One of the things we talked about, the name cooperative, whether
Hurry
that
up,
should
hurry
be,
up.
that will be one of the things that's debated. So we'll encourage you to come out. It's going to be at the Red Cross this Sunday from 2 to 5.
Mr. Elson, Lowe, Mr. Timothy Jonas, Dr. Henry Jeffery, thank you very much. I think we agree that, yes, we need constitutional reform.
Thank you, sir. It's on time.
Thank you.
Operators and viewers, thank you. Good night. See you next week.